and verses that guide people toward transforming their behavior. Verses that guide people to transforming their behavior into noble actions. Makarim al-akhlaq. I will now discuss matters related to heartfelt closeness and love, samimiyat and mahabbat. Heartfelt closeness and love among one's fellow believers. And I will also speak of purifying the nafs. In a sound hadith related by both Bukhari and Muslim, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam declared, "Be servants of God. Be servants and brothers. Be servants of God and be brothers." And God declared in Surah Ar-Rum, ayah 31 and 32, "And do not be among those who worship others besides God, those who have broken the unity of their faith and have become sects." In other words, do not be like those who found differences among their brethren and called one another unbelievers. Do not be like those who found differences among their brethren and called one another unbelievers, and as a result, lost their grandeur, lost their strength, lost their unity. Also, we hear Allah Ta'ala in Surah Al-Hujarat, ayah 13, stating, "O humankind, we created you all from a male and a female, and have made you into nations and tribes, so that you might come to know one another." So that you might come to know one another. That is to say, not so that you can boast about or claim the superiority of your lineage and make one another feel bad. You should know that one's racial origin and lineage are nothing to be proud of. As God also in Surah Al-Hujurat, ayah 13 says, "The noblest of you, from God's perspective, are the most conscious of God." O my honorable brethren, in the glorious Quran, the degrees of the human self are described in the following manner. The first degree of the self is the compelling self, an-nafs al-ammara, which God refers to in the following words of Yusuf in the Quran. And I quote, "And I am not trying to absolve myself. Indeed, man's self does incite him to evil." The second degree of the self is the blaming self, an-nafs al-lawama. And I quote Surah Al-Qiyamah, ayah, the first and second ayahs, "I call to witness the day of resurrection. I call to witness the blaming self." This verse indicates that the human self will ask itself why it has committed crimes, why it has displayed rebelliousness to Allah. The third degree of the self is the self at peace, an-nafs al-mutma'inna. As God states in the Quran, "O self at peace, return to your sustainer, he being content with you and you being content with him. Enter among my servants, enter my paradise." The first generations of Muslims, including the generation following the companions, the scholars, the servants of God in general, the ascetics, the zuhad, and the righteous, they all paid particular attention to these three degrees and stages of the qualities of the self of which the glorious Quran speaks. By striving to model their behavior after the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by striving to model their behavior after the example of the Prophet, and by assimilating his character into their own, they engaged in the purification of their selves. By the way, for those of you who have just come in, I'm translating Shaykh Masum's speech. By striving to model their behavior after the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and assimilating his character into their own, these first generations engaged in purifying themselves. In the words of the glorious Quran in Surah Al-A'la, ayah 14 to 15, those who achieve salvation will be those who have become purified, who remember the name of their sustainer, and who pray. And also in Surah Ash-Shams, ayah 9 through 10, Allah declares, those who attain salvation will be the ones who purify themselves, and those who become lost will be the ones who do nothing with themselves. While in private or in public, while traveling or at home, these early generations of Muslims who were careful to model their behavior after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these early generations of Muslims were watchful of themselves, continually restraining the rebelliousness of themselves. The people of those times called these Muslims Sufis. In following the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were not devoted to physical pleasures, were not devoted to idolizing their bodies, and they preferred over everything the purity and light of the heart, as well as the remembrance and knowledge of God, ma'rifah. In addition, by the light of their spiritual vision, they saw what little value lay in all of the unstable and transient vicissitudes of the world, and they called for the fulfillment of human obligations to Allah. They called for the fulfillment of human obligations to Allah Ta'ala, the putting into practice of the divine commands, and they called for the implementation of social justice for the community of Islam. Also, they were opposed to the decadence of the Muslim world, namely the oppression, the tyranny, the corruption, the lack of self-restraint among individuals, the ignorance, materialism, and debauchery, circumstances that are now common among rulers in Muslim countries. The corrupt and oppressive elites of those times, along with the world-worshipping superficial scholars whose hearts were hardened and without vision. These oppressive elites and scholars harassed and attacked many Sufis, justifying their attacks on the basis that they were rooting out innovation in religion, that they were eliminating bid'ah. The truth of the matter is that all of the behavior, actions, and words of these Sufis were in accord with the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were in accord with the Sunnah of the Prophet, harmonious with his way of being. It is obvious that there can be no coexistence of the opposites of light and darkness, knowledge and ignorance, innocence and corruption, and justice and oppression. One must take note of the criticisms and oppositions voiced against Muawiyah by the exalted ascetic and beloved